I rounded up the best affordable automatic watches from 6 brands, and today I'm going to put them head to head to see who makes the best affordable automatic watch. Take a quick look and then I'll introduce the brands. Today there are more brands than ever that are offering affordable automatic watches. I've chosen 6 brands, and for each one I've picked a watch that I think best represents what they offer in the affordable segment today. From Seiko, we have the 5 Sports GMT Field Watch for $360. From Orient, we've got the Mako 40mm edition. This is the newest version of this watch. You can pick it up for $259. From Citizen, we have another new watch. This is their new Tsuyosa Shore version. So this is kind of the diver version of the Tsuyosa. This one you can get for $371. And Casio is now a player in the affordable automatic watch market. We're going to be taking a look at their EFK 100, which you can get for $280. Timex has also been releasing a lot of automatic watches lately. We're going to be checking out the Timex Marlin. Specifically, this is the one with the 24-hour subdial. And this one is available for a really cheap price right now. You can pick it up for around $214 off of Amazon. And you can't talk about affordable automatics these days without looking at a Chinese brand. And I think the best one in this category is San Martin, and we're going with their runaway hit in the 0144. This was being listed on AliExpress for $296 at the time of this review, but this often goes on sale, so you might be able to pick it up for cheaper than that. If you're interested in purchasing any of these watches, I'll leave affiliate links down below in the description. Going into this comparison, I thought I already knew how these watches would play out. I figured San Martin would dominate on specs, Orient would probably be the value king, and Timex wouldn't really stand much of a chance. But after spending a lot of time with all of these watches, some of those assumptions turned out to be right, and some of them turned out to be completely wrong. Now, you might have noticed the prices on these watches range quite a bit, coming from around $200 going all the way up to nearly $400. But surprisingly, I found that after evaluating all of these watches, more expensive didn't necessarily mean better. And at the end of this video, after we figured out which one is the best in some sort of objective sense, I'll also give you a ranking on which ones I personally like and would actually wear or add to my own collection. Now, I've also chosen 6 categories that I'm going to evaluate these watches on. I'm going to give them points based on these categories, and at the end, I'll declare a winner. But let's jump in with the first category and talk about the engineering and manufacturing of the watch. This is going to include things like the specifications and just the overall build quality of the watch. This category was surprisingly close. However, I do think there's a clear definition between the 3 best watches and the 3 worst watches in terms of the quality of the manufacturing and engineering. Timex is going to get last place here. I really like the vintage styling, but objectively, this has the weakest specs by far, has an acrylic crystal, only 50 meters of water resistance, and the least impressive finishing overall. The next 2 spots were really close here, but Citizen gets the edge thanks to the sapphire crystal and the excellent bracelet, as well as an anti-magnetic case. While Seiko loses a few points for its unnecessary 14 millimeters of thickness and a Hardlex crystal. Moving up to 3rd place, surprisingly, is Casio's automatic watch. The overall quality here is outstanding. You get the sapphire crystal, you get great finishing throughout, really high quality dial and handset. It's just a more complete package than anything else we've seen below this. But it is going to get beaten out by the 2nd place winner, which is going to Orient. And that's not really a surprise. Orient is giving you a sapphire crystal. You're getting a full 200 meters of water resistance, and that's despite the fact that this is still basically the same thickness as the Casio or the Citizen, but this one has double the water resistance, as well as a screw-down crown, an absolutely gorgeous dial, and high-quality handset and markers. On these new 40mm versions of the Mako, Orient has also gone with a very nice-looking stainless steel bezel. The only area where it lacks is the bracelet. It's kind of a Radley bracelet. It features hollow end links, so it's probably the worst bracelet on the list. That leaves the San Martin SN0144 as our winner, and it wins by a long shot in this category. Everything about the manufacturing of this watch is top-notch, from the case to the bracelet to the clasp. In terms of the quality of the manufacturing and engineering, this feels like it's on the level of a $1,000 watch. The quality of the brushing and polishing on the finish work is amazing. It's coming in at only 10 millimeters thick, and the bracelet is both solid and features by far the best clasp of anything we've seen, with a smoothly operating tool-free adjustment system that just makes the watch so much easier to wear. Ever since I started using clasps like that, I found it really hard to go back to traditional bracelets. And the same can be said for the sponsor of today's video, Anson Belts, which uses a revolutionary micro-adjust track system on the belts that they offer. Anson Belts is a family-owned company that has completely revolutionized the way that belts work. Unlike traditional belts that have holes and buckles, Anson uses a very cool micro-adjust track system. This allows you to get a very custom fit to your belt and allows you to adjust it very easily on the fly. Again, very similar to how these micro-adjust clasp systems work on high-end watches. And the end result is a belt that's not only more comfortable and easier to use, but also one that's going to last a lot longer. On a traditional belt, you really have to bend the leather quite frequently anytime you're putting it on and off. But Anson belts put minimal stress on the leather by using these custom buckles and the track system on the back of the belts. I've been wearing mine nonstop since I got them, and they're easily the best belts I've ever known. Once you try it, you'll never go back to your old belts. And because Anson Belt and Buckle is sponsoring today's video, when you click the link in the description or scan the QR code to build a box set, you'll get 2 bonus pieces, a buckle and a strap completely free. That's 3 buckles, 3 straps, which can be mixed and matched into 9 unique belt combos all in one box. This is an exclusive deal you won't get anywhere else, so click the link, build your set, and upgrade your belt game today. One of the most important categories when it comes to an automatic watch is the automatic movement inside, and that's the next category we're going to be looking at. Let's see if we can figure out which of these watches has the best automatic movement. Movement is another category that's somewhat close. All 6 of these watches feature reliable Japanese automatic movements, so all of these are going to give you really good performance for your money. Still, each watch features a different movement inside of it, so we can rank those. Starting at the bottom, the least capable movement we're going to see today is in the Citizen Ciosa. This features the Citizen 8210, which is essentially Citizen's branded version of the Miyota 8215. But this is one of the most basic movements that Citizen manufactures, and it has a tendency to be a little bit noisy, and you can usually feel the rotor spinning around on your wrist. So I'm giving it 6th place here. In 5th place, we have another automatic movement, this time Orient with their F6722. The nice thing here is that this one features bidirectional winding, so it's a little bit quieter on the wrist. Generally, I've found that this performs fairly equivalently to the Seiko NH35, so it's really tough to define the difference between these two. But the Seiko NH35 is more popular, it's more widely used, so I'm going to rank it slightly higher, and that's why you were seeing the Casio in the 4th place, because it does use the Seiko NH35 automatic movement. This might be a bit controversial, but I'm going to put the Timex in 3rd place, even though it features another Miyota 8000 series movement in the Miyota 8217. It's going to have the same problems that the last place movement had, in that it has kind of a louder rotor. So I think you can definitely make the case for putting it below the Casio or the Orient. But this movement does feature an extra complication with the addition of a 24-hour subdial at 9 o'clock. And while I know a lot of you guys are thinking 24-hour subdial is kind of useless, I found it really helpful, and I'll tell you about why when we get to the ownership experience segment of this. I think it's actually a really cool complication to add in this watch. 2nd place is going to San Martin. They're using one of my favorite automatic movements in the Miyota 9015. This is a very slim automatic movement. It also features a higher beat rate than anything else we've seen on the list, so you get a smoother sweeping second hand. This is the movement that Miyota created to go head-to-head with the Swiss movement manufacturers like ETA and Solita. Just a great choice. But it's not good enough to take the top spot. I'm going to give that to Seiko with the NR34. This is a newer in-house movement from Seiko. It's one that they released a few years ago, and it completely changed the landscape of affordable automatic watches because it made the automatic GMT complication affordable for the first time. Even though it's an in-house automatic movement, Seiko makes this available to other manufacturers under the NH34 designation. A GMT is one of my favorite complications, so being able to get it in an entry-level automatic watch like this is just amazing, and that's why I'm giving the top spot to Seiko here. One of the things I've spent a lot of time on this channel is evaluating the performance of Lume on watches. I came up with my own scoring system in order to rank that, so we're going to apply that here and figure out which of these watches has the best Lume. That's our next category. I put 4 of these watches head-to-head in my J-score test, but 2 of them I didn't even bother with. The Casio EFK 100 barely has any Lume at all. You just get very tiny little pips at the tips of the hands, so it gets last place there. Surprisingly, Timex beat it out because this looks like a dress watch, but it actually has a little thin line of Lume on the hands and little plots for each 12-hour marker. And while it doesn't last particularly long, it does beat out the Casio, which should have better lume because this is ostensibly a sports watch. So yeah, pretty disappointing showing from Casio there. The other four we can rank based on their J-scores, and as you can see here, we're getting another disappointment in Citizen. I had hoped that the Citizen Ciosa Shore, with its more dive watch stylings and broader handset, would have better lume, but it actually fades out very quick and only scored a 3 on the test. The Seiko beat it out with a score of 5, and that's in a field watch format, which typically doesn't have as good a lume as a dive watch or a sports watch, so acceptable there. San Martin scored even higher with a 7, and this is a pretty good application of BGW9, so it's got a really cool bright blue glow. And despite the hands and markers both being somewhat thin, it lasted very long. But Orient beats out everybody by a significant margin with a score of 10. They're giving you a lume performance that is comparable to what Seiko offers on their professional level dive watches. The only complaint I have about the Orient is that it doesn't feature an actual lume pip on the bezel, which is a requirement for a true dive watch, but that's a bit of a minor complaint. So those first 3 categories were fairly objective. They deal with the mechanical and engineering and performance aspects of the watch. These next 3 categories are a little bit more subjective. But nonetheless, these are incredibly important categories to consider when you're trying to determine whether a watch is right for you. So next category we're going to be looking at is the design of the watch. This category turned out to be a big surprise because the watches that scored the best on the manufacturing and engineering part of the test tended to score the worst when it comes to design, at least in my opinion. San Martin has been dominating the first 3 categories here and easily took the top spot when it comes to engineering and manufacturing. The quality of the finishing and the intricacy of the dial is truly impressive from a manufacturing standpoint, but when you take a step back and look at the visual design of the watch as a whole, things start to fall apart a little bit. The dial, while interesting and impressive, in my opinion, is just a little too bright and loud, while the handset and index markers are a little on the plain side. Looking at the specs and the price, this looks like it should be a no-brainer, but in reality, it's one that I don't actually tend to wear that often because the design just doesn't really speak to me. Orient presents a much cleaner, safer, attractive design, but I think they're playing it too safe here. There's not a lot that distinguishes this from other dive watches, other than the dial, which is actually a really beautiful shade of blue. Citizen, on the other hand, took a very bold approach by taking their integrated bracelet sports watch and turning it into something of a dive watch. It makes for a very interesting combination, and it's one that I think works. It's a little quirky, but cool. Casio really impressed me here. They're more known for their plastic digital watches, but they've done an amazing job building a really beautiful sports watch. It has sharp angles and wide bevels, and does a great job referencing neo-vintage Japanese automotive designs. In second place, we have Seiko with an absolutely beautifully designed GMT field watch. They did an amazing job taking one of their own classic field watch designs and then reinterpreting it as a GMT watch. For me, it creates something that's reminiscent of the Rolex Explorer 2, which is one of my favorite GMT watches. And this is especially true on the Polar Dial edition that I have here. Still, I wouldn't even call this an homage to the Rolex Explorer 2. It's very clearly a Seiko watch coming from their own design history and heritage. And I think it's amazing that they implemented a design this good on one of their entry-level affordable automatic watches. But in terms of design, my favorite watch of the bunch was the Timex Marlin, which again completely inverts the scoring from the first half of this video. Timex lost a few points in the manufacturing section for going with a cheap acrylic crystal instead of a sapphire, but as a deliberate design choice, it works brilliantly here. The crystal here is huge, and that acrylic material offers a level of distortion and style that you just can't duplicate with sapphire. And this is something of a vintage reissue for Timex. The Marlin is an actual vintage watch that Timex produced back in the 60s. And these new Marlins that they started producing in the last 10 years harken back to those vintage designs. I really like this particular one with the 24-hour subdial and the cushion case. It's a little bit more interesting and quirky. And for me, that color scheme with the silver dial and the red and blue hands kind of harkens back to the glory days of American watchmaking, of which Timex was a huge part. So while the Timex may not have the best finishing or the highest level of durability, because I love the design so much, this is the one I kept wanting to put on my wrist. Okay, moving on to the next category, we're going to talk about user experience or owner experience. Really what this comes down to is, do I enjoy using and owning the watch? Or are there things that annoy me about it that kind of keep me from not wanting to put it on in the morning? So again, this is subjective, but there were a number of things in these watches that really bugged me and made me less likely to pick them up. Out of these watches, the one that has the worst owner experience, in my opinion, is the Citizen Ciosa Shore. There's a few things that annoyed me about this watch, but by far the worst is the 4 o'clock crown. This is a small, awkwardly placed crown that's extremely difficult to hand wind. So unless you're planning on wearing this all the time, it's going to be very annoying every time you pick it up to wind it. This is also a watch with an integrated bracelet, which means that you can't change the bracelet. And so the bracelets and clasps on these watches really need to be excellent to compensate for that. The bracelet quality is very good, but the clasp only features 2 positions for micro adjust, which means that you may have a challenge getting a perfect fit. And while I love the functionality that unidirectional bezel adds, it's a little bit slippery and the action isn't particularly great. In 5th place is Casio, and that's because this is another integrated bracelet watch, and the problems here are also with the bracelet. Just like Citizen, Casio is only giving you 2 positions of micro adjust on the clasp, and it also has male end links that protrude pretty far past the lugs. And the end result is that most of the time I felt like this watch wore kind of awkwardly on the wrist. In 4th place, we have the Seiko GMT. It's overly thick at 14 millimeters. It has somewhat of a cheaper clasp. So for me, this is giving a very middle of the road ownership experience. I'm going to put Orient slightly ahead in 3rd place, and that's despite the somewhat rattly bracelet. It's impressively thin for a 200-meter diver, and the screw-down crown is very easy to use and operate. I also found the bezel action here to be very satisfying. I feel like it's better than any of the other Orient divers that I've tested. So wearing the watch and using all of its functions always gave a very pleasing feeling. 2nd place is going to Timex, and this is in large part due to that 24-hour subdial. Normally, I think 24-hour subdials are pointless, but when it's used in combination with an automatic movement and a date complication, it suddenly becomes incredibly useful. And that's because it makes setting the date a lot easier. Setting the date on an automatic watch is kind of a pain because you normally can't tell whether the watch is in the AM or PM time. So having a 24-hour subdial that tells you exactly that makes it much easier to set the date. Also, thanks to the size and the softness of the leather band, this is a very comfortable watch to wear on the wrist. But best ownership experience is going to go to the San Martin. Everything on the watch feels great to interact with, but the best feature is that tool-free micro adjust on the clasp. Just the fact that it has that would probably put it to the top of the list for me, but this is also a very good implementation of this style of clasp. It mimics what Rolex does on their clasps, where you just pop the back of the bracelet out of the clasp and then you can slide it in and out. And having that ability to adjust the size of the bracelet on the fly is one of the best features there is in terms of user experience. So San Martin's taking the win here. Okay, so up to this point, we've been able to score these watches on 5 different categories, and that's given us some interesting data to look at. And I think it will really help us as we evaluate the final category, which is value. If we take the cost of a watch and divide it by the amount of points that it's scored so far, that's essentially going to tell us how much you're paying per point of goodness on each of these watches. So watches that have the lowest cost per point have the highest value. In last place is the Citizen Ciosa. This is the most expensive watch on the list. At the time of recording, this was selling for $371 on their website. And at that price point, you're spending an astounding $33.73 per point, which in my opinion makes it the worst value of the 6 watches we're looking at. In 5th place, the Casio Edifice scored significantly better, only asking you to spend $20 per point. This is one that has been constantly selling out, so it's a bit hard to get your hands on, but Casio has it listed at $280. And even though it's scoring pretty low in terms of value compared to the other watches on this list, it's still not bad in my opinion. Slightly better at 4th place is the Seiko 5 Sports GMT. While the white version is sold out almost everywhere, you can pick up the black version on Amazon for $360, which comes out at $18 per point. The top 3 watches have a significant jump in terms of value, with all of them coming in extremely close to one another. The Orient Mako 40 comes in at 3rd place. That one's asking $13.63 per point, with a total cost of $259. Now, I think these last 2 are going to be a bit surprising, but in 2nd place, we have the San Martin. I would have picked this one to be the easy value winner going into this, as it scored consistently high in most of the categories and still comes in at a price in the middle of the road at around $296, which means it's spending about $12.87 per point. But ultimately, it was just barely edged out by the Timex. And again, this is surprising because the Timex scored fairly low in a lot of the categories that we looked at. But this Timex is available for an extremely low price right now. I found it in a number of different retailers. I've got it priced at $214 from Amazon. And at that price, you're only spending $11.89 per point. And after going through evaluating all these categories and evaluating these watches, I do think this is the best value watch out of the ones that we've looked at. But does that mean that this is the best watch overall? Well, it's time to unveil the final scores and see where things play out. First off, there is one clear winner here, and that is in the San Martin SN0144. In 5 out of the 6 categories, it took either the first or second place spot. The only place that it struggled was in the design, and again, that's the most subjective aspect of the watch. I think a lot of people are going to look at that design and they're going to love it, and if they do, then that makes this watch a fantastic choice with virtually no drawbacks. And for most of you, this isn't going to come as a surprise. Chinese manufacturers have really come to dominate this affordable section of the automatic market. And with a score that's 4 points above our second place brand, it really shows how dominant San Martin is. Where things do get really interesting is in the next 3 places because we're locked in a virtual tie for second place here, with Seiko, Orient, and Timex all having almost the same score. But edging out both Orient and Seiko, surprisingly, Timex takes the second place spot. Until recently, they were known far more for their lower priced quartz options than their automatic watches, but they've made some tremendous strides in that area, and they have a whole range of really interesting automatic watches. Now, just barely under Timex, we have a tie between Seiko and Orient at 23 points apiece. These are sister brands that are often compared to one another. And while they each have their own strengths and weaknesses, at the end of all this, I've scored them as equivalent. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to disagree with that. Most people don't look at Seiko as a good value proposition anymore. But I really do think their Seiko 5 Sports GMT options are something special. But you know what? There's something special about Orient too. This is a historic Japanese brand that makes their own movements. So in a lot of ways, they're very similar to Seiko, but they often give you a lot more for your money than Seiko currently does. And again, I think if I had picked any other Seiko besides one of their GMT options, Orient probably would have edged them out, but Orient doesn't have an automatic GMT option. And I think that's one of the big reasons why Seiko is still ahead of them here. 5th and 6th place had a massive gap between the rest of the pack. Casio came in at 16 points and the Citizen scored 11 points. And that was surprising because the Citizen was the most expensive watch on the list. I know these watches are incredibly popular right now, and I was really hoping that this would score better and that there would be more to like about it. And while I found the bracelet and the case to be exceptional and the sapphire crystal to be very nice, the bezel, the handset, and the dial were all a little bit on the lackluster side. And I really hated the crown on this watch. It was just so hard to use. So that's my opinion of how these brands currently stack up in terms of who's offering the best affordable automatic watches right now. But that's not actually my ranking of what my favorite watches are on this list. If I were going to rank the watches that I like the best and would be most interested in purchasing and adding to my own collection for me to wear, my favorite would be that Timex Marlin. I've just been loving wearing that watch. I love that it comes from Timex, which is an American brand and one of the few great American watch brands left. Second place, I put the Seiko. Living here in Japan, I really appreciate Seiko, and they are one of my favorite brands. And this particular Seiko 5 Sports GMT with the white dial has got to be one of my favorite offerings from them. Third place, I'd put Orient. I think it's a great watch. And while I don't find the design particularly exciting, I think it is a good-looking design. In fact, my wife picked that as her favorite of the bunch. I would drop San Martin down to 4th place. I'm not particularly a fan of the design of the watch. It's okay, but there's so many other amazing things about the watch that I still really like it. I just tend to feel a little bit self-conscious when I'm wearing it about. But I would still keep Casio and Citizen at the lowest. And in large part, it's because both of these are integrated bracelet watches. I'm not a huge fan of that, unless the bracelet is so good that I would never want to change it to anything else. And on both of these watches, I would probably appreciate the ability to swap to a strap or a bracelet if I wanted to. So that's going to wrap up the video for today. Again, big thanks to Anson Belts for sponsoring this video. Make sure you go check them out. You can either hit the link down in the description or use the QR code that's on your screen. And finally, I'd love to hear your opinion on this list. What do you think is the best brand out of these 6? What do you think is the best watch? Do you agree with the rankings? If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. But that will wrap it up for today. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.